Hey, good day, good evening, good twilight, good middle of the night, whenever you happenstance upon this truth bomb riff by Patrick Lovell, the muckraking investigative journalist that is trying to create a tidal wave crusade to purge corruption and save our democracy and the future of the world at the same time. Now, interestingly enough, as I'm looking at my face there, I've got this band-aid because I went to the dermatologist this morning and I had to get a basal cell biopsy because when you get to be middle aged and you're a guy like me who spent a whole lot of time in the sun, it catches up with you and you start thinking about it and you're like, oh God, I've got not one, but as it turns out, a whole lot of basal cells to consider. And thank God none of them are melanoma. But I exercise a lot and I do a lot of stuff that doesn't help anything with the skin after years of being in the sun, surfing and water skiing and all sorts of crazy stuff back in the day. But I also found out recently that I'm pre-diabetic and, I got to keep my sugar low. And that means changing my diet and losing some weight and all of those things that happen when you're middle aged. And, it got me to thinking because of all of the other pressure and stuff that I'm under constantly is, we got to make some hard decisions. We all have to make hard decisions. You never know how much time you have left on this earth, and you've got to give it all your all. Especially if, for example, you really actually did have news that maybe you weren't going to live very long, and you saw the writing on the wall. I don't need that to be able to remind me of how important what it is I'm trying to evoke in you and connect with you about. And really, given everything that's transpiring, I feel like everything that I've been bringing to you is becoming more and more legitimate every day, and it feels like Groundhog Day. But at the same time, it's like, when does it penetrate? But when does it penetrate though? It's I feel well. I got a first comment on something that just took me by surprise right before I clicked this. Essentially, I just happened to get a notification from our GoFundMe, and it was amazing. One of the really icons and somebody I consider a trusted friend, a gentleman out of the Bay Area by the name of Douglas Boggs, who is a phenomenal writer and also a great podcaster, an incredible talent, and somebody I deeply, deeply appreciate, specifically his friendship. But more importantly, to be honest with you, if there's anything more important than friendship, it's what he has revealed as one of these sort of vectors out there in the United States that I can't even begin to describe to you what he had to endure in what I call the righteous grind to be able to achieve what he did. He wrote a book called Quantum of Justice, which I think to date is the best book that I have ever read about exactly what's legal and what's not in the courts and deconstructed how millions of foreclosures in the state of California were illegal and why and how they came to be and what sort of techniques the courts enabled. And it was a eureka as I moved it. And I recall talking to Doug years ago about this and having a grasp of what it was that he was talking about. But at the same time, nothing could have prepared me for the details in his book. And when you understand that this guy was kind of a Renaissance guy before he kind of hit the rewind button on 20 years. I mean, the guy was in music, did recording with some of the biggest artists out of San Francisco, got involved with developing and building houses. A can-do guy who can do a ton of different things very well. For anybody who has ever tried to build a house, multiply that by 20, 30 in places like Dallas and San Francisco, which is no easy task. And yes, he did that for a long time and did very well in the run up. And then, like millions of other people, got rug pulled. And like many people that I've met on this incredible journey, couldn't sit on the sidelines and just accept it. He had to figure out, like several of us have, what the hell was going on. And he did. And he achieved it in this book called Quantum of Justice. And, I feel kind of guilty that in my truth bombs, this is the first time I'm mentioning it, because right before I hit play on this, I just happened to be notified that he contributed and invested into our movement, our crusade to purge corruption, which is extremely meaningful to me. But I couldn't get to this point without the knowledge of what I got in the book Quantum of Justice. So I highly encourage you to check it out. if you're in this space, particularly if you're actually going through the unfortunate circumstances of being set up in a massive foreclosure syndicate. And trust me, you're going to need all the information that you can get. But, at the same time, we get so much information that's thrown at us so fast and furious, it's hard to keep up. So, right before I hit play on this as well, I just happened to read the headlines in the New York Times that the Federal Reserve kicked up the interest rate, a half point, and I was pretty much expecting markets to decrease rapidly as a result of that. I think yesterday markets took a big hit because of the lingering effects and anxiety and everything that's associated with these bank runs that I'll get into in a minute. And the markets were down substantially. I think they were down over 500 points by midday yesterday, and I think they rebounded to like a loss of 300. Pretty significant fall. But today, in the span of like minutes, I saw that the markets actually decreased quite a bit, and then they rebounded immediately, which is amazing. That's how fast things happen. Let's take a quick look at it and just see. Yeah, they're up marginally. I mean, but I guess that's good news that the markets were probably predicting that the Fed may have increased rates more, which would have had potentially systemic issues with some of the regional banks, which I think we're still dealing with. But based on what the powers have been able to construct and do over the course of the last 3 weeks, maybe they think they've got the contagion in the bag and it's time to move forward. Even though I just happened to see some other headlines that said that we're right back into 2006 from Zero Hedge, which is an important source. And the next thing, they said was, what happens next is when it gets really fun, meaning they're foreshadowing the type of scenario that we were in between 2006 and 2008, much of which I reveal to you constantly in these truth bomb riffs, but also in so much of the material that I lay down in our work. Again, to remind you, if you're a newcomer to this, I'm a muckraker journalist. I'm an independent producer. I produced, I think, probably the most important television series that exists today that very few know, even though we have been seen or viewed by millions of people. But this information needs to get to tens of millions of people. You can find that information at www.thecon.tv. And I've also been involved with a fantastic podcast that you can find more information on at The Real Progressives. If you do a Google search for The New Untouchables, you put those two things together and you've got a phenomenal, I think it's a 20-hour podcast that reveals so much more information. And then you can always find me on Patrick Level Truth Bombs The Con on TikTok, as well as Patrick Level Truth Bombs The Con on YouTube, where we're actually seeing a tiny increase of interest, but we obviously need much, much more to turn the tables on this vast, insane corruption that has absolute control of not only our country, but I dare say the world. Look, in the last 24 hours, in addition to everything else, and it's going to be a little bit pinballish because on the one hand, I'm highly critical of mainstream media, but at the same time, there are certain stories that manifest that make sense that I'm going to get, believe the credibility and the fact checking is correct in specific scenarios, and also acknowledge that in many cases it could be a political choice to do so. And I'm talking initially about Tucker Carlson's revelations through text messages that are a part of the Dominion lawsuit discovery that Tucker was exactly what I thought he was this whole time, which I could read between the lines in everything that I've ever viewed of Tucker as he talks about MAGA-related issues or the insurrection or anything on that side of issues, that he really has a deeply, deeply systemic hatred of anything that's not part of his tribe, which I think we can calculate as MAGA. He was cheering on the beating of several MAGA protesters at the January 6th insurrection of an anti-fascist protester where 3 guys jumped on one, and he was tweeting to his producer, "I hope they kill him. I want that guy destroyed." But I think he also said some silliness like, "That's not how white people fight." But the long and the short of it is, he just shows his cards again. Like, okay, who are you, Tucker? You hate President Trump, but you do his bidding and you bootlick him. You're, anti-war, but is that because you're pro-Putin and pro whatever undergirds this, what I would call, and I've read the tea leaves many times, that when you hear Putin, through all of the different vectors of media that propel this sort of information on occasion. It's like the guy is wanting to be a kind of a centerpiece piece of a white, ultra white national conservative sort of supremacist movement globally. And there's always like these dog whistles of like, yeah, the neoliberal. Well, he doesn't say neoliberal, but he says the elitist, right? Which he's probably referring to Jews on Wall Street. And it's amazing because Jews on Wall Street, many have been completely guilty of doing things he's accusing them of and then crying foul with anti Semitism, which is extremely problematic as well. I could go down the list. I could talk about women that I observed this last week that, in a different time in their career coming up and maybe going to law school and everything else, maybe were in some degree beneficiaries of the incredible challenges that women had to overcome throughout our society, only to become basically complicit in mammoth grift and deception and, quite frankly, illegal behavior on behalf of the financial system that has bulldozed millions of people illegally, but they do so willingly because that's where they get their paycheck. I'm sorry, in this age of this pinball sort of cultural identity warfare, we see all the time these sort of chameleon-like maneuverings, and it's just part and parcel to the manipulation in psychology of how this shit plays out with algorithms. The other side of it is, and I called them out today, Russell Brand and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, and of course Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald, all of which are maybe, if you categorize them, far left, anti-war. Obviously, Glenn Greenwald, a legitimate journalist and a very, very smart, capable, and courageous guy, I might add. But you know what? Happy to be a guest on Tucker Carlson's show where he manipulates whoever he can get to basically detract from whatever the establishment power is in the White House that's not MAGA, that might be antithetical to Putin's, efforts, which of course all play out in the Ukraine. And, Jesus Christ, man, I was just taking a look last night and this morning, at Twitter, and I see things on Twitter that are remarkable that you don't see in mainstream media, and I'm just talking about video. So there was this interesting video of the Kremlin being attacked, supposedly by drones that were orchestrated by Ukrainian forces, and I'm not sure, I haven't done any fact checking and cross-pollinating stories, I haven't had the time, but it was just remarkable to see it if that's indeed what it was. It was interesting that something could get within their airspace and that close to the Kremlin if that's what it was, and how they did it would have been kind of an interesting execution. But further to that, the videos that are coming from the riots in France, and off the May Day, celebration slash, sort of, protests that always accrue at this time of year. But of course, because of what we saw last week and the week before with the firebombing of the offices of BlackRock, based on pensions and many other sorts of, again, protestations from the French people. But it's amazing when you look at all of these things in their congruency. It's really not hard to think that we're in this kind of cataclysmic, like really precarious scenario where globally there's things that are just tripwired that could, quickly and rapidly create even more misery than we've experienced for the last 20 years. And I can assure you that is a scary, scary proposition. But all of this stuff is related to everything that I've been bringing you in these truth bombs, and that basically corroborate and lift up the foundation and the principles of what I'm trying to do with creating a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. And the battle cry is, if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and liberty and decency and integrity and sustainability, come together in unity, that we can defeat tyranny, and that is our destiny. And I say that in pursuit of what I am calling a clean new deal, to purge corruption and then ultimately, destroy the dark ages that we've been in for the last 20 years, and then open up the, the tunnel, if you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, to a new enlightenment, a reboot of the system, and not in the reset way that the MAGAs in the fourth turning and all of those guys are all about, but just in a common sense way to reestablish liberty and justice for all by purging corruption. And I'll get more into that, but look, I mean, we're at the situation where, you know, the headlines are simply that the bank runs and this duplicity of mainstream media, for example, to easily prop up all of the obvious criminality of Donald Trump and everything that he's in the midst of, while at the same time obfuscating and obscuring what Wall Street and our financial system has been up to for really decades, but again on overdrive since they destroyed the global economy and got it all by looting the system and pillaging illegally what the Federal Reserve was able to provide when nobody was looking, which is really the centerpiece of everything that is I'm revealing to you, which is how Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to pump tens of trillions of dollars into a system of corruption and criminality that was so widespread and global, nothing like it has ever been seen before in history, primarily because of technology. The amount of lies, it's the largest conspiracy of lies in the history of the world. And again, because of all of the elements that we relay to you and refract to you and focus in our work, The Con, at www.thecon.tv, which is ultimately the investigation and the revelations that the government of the United States did, but at the same time obfuscated. And media never brought this to your attention. They could never tell the story, or they chose not to tell the story because of the corruption that I've alluded to. And that left it up to the American people, i.e., me and my team, to go out and actually make sense of that which did not make sense, which ultimately reveals not only was there this global conspiracy that pulled the rug on millions of people, from people who are homeowners who refinanced mortgages or were investing for first time, or any variety of people in that particular situation, but it was so much more than people in the housing scenario. It was also pensioners and people in cities and municipalities and governments that were also had the rug pull and destroyed everyone because they connected borrowers to pensions, and then this machinery in between, which went global, as the financial terrorism that destroyed the world, that then led to our central bank and central banks providing trillions upon trillions of dollars to the people in the systems that did this. And then we never had any prosecutions. And then ultimately, the judiciary was used to bury millions of people illegally because all of these mortgages were illegal to begin with, which meant that if you can't take coal and you can't do the what is it called when you do the chemical process, and you can turn it into gold. I can't, it's like a magic process, I can't think of the term, but you can't do that in reverse also, okay, because of the nature of securitization. And here I am trying to explain in the most simple way possible something that I find very simple because my life's been involved with it for so long, and I've gone to the ends of the earth and back with tens of hours involved with this and millions of dollars that made it all happen. So I became an expert in it, but I realize that there are those of you out there. I was just, channel surfing last night, all of the late show talk show hosts, because I wanted to see, if there was going to be some sort of reaction, or maybe they were going to just shut down the shows overall because of the nature of the union strike for writers that are part of the Writers Guild of America. And they all went on strike yesterday. And so that's going to shut down a lot of the late night shows and comedy shows like Saturday Night Live and that sort of thing. And, but I didn't see any telltale signs of it last night. I'm sure we will starting today, or repeats or that sort of thing. But I did happen to catch on Kimmel just briefly. He did that man on the street scenario like Jay Leno used to do, where he goes out and does something silly. And in this particular case, they showed a picture of Mike Pence to just regular people on Hollywood Boulevard. And none of them could identify who Mike Pence was. And I was thinking to myself, here I am trying to talk about complex financial realities in geopolitics and government policy, which requires obviously a specific basic education, which is pretty much at the bare minimum what I have, right? Which is a bachelor's degree and a specific sort of interest and awareness of how things work, and probably, experience in the world to understand how things work. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how do you translate that to people who can't identify who the vice president was, who MAG has threatened to hang, and is a part of this whole January 6th investigation and everything that comes with it. And it's ridiculous that we have so many people who don't even know. I don't even know if I could call that the basics. But I want to try to encourage those of you who are watching this, who might feel confused, that this might be over your head, so therefore not worth your time. Just the opposite. I will guide you through this process. I will reveal to you how the system is corrupt, how the system is supposed to work, and why it doesn't based on our revelations, and what we can ultimately do to get our country back. The only way we're going to be able to do this is if we get millions of people to come together to join with the facts to overwhelm the madness of noise obfuscation and disinformation and manipulation and everything that our system is. And you got to think of it like this, in context to everything else that I'm laying out for you. So media in general, I mean, if you look at the just pretty much the playing field of newspapers around the United States, hedge funds have purchased all of the papers of the United States over the course of the last 20 years. And in so doing, they destroyed investigative journalism. That's the first part. The second part is all of the biggest platforms that we have in media are owned by billionaires or multinationals. And they're part of the system that I'm revealing to you. So they have not told you the truth of how we have had our government hijacked by a criminal apparatus. I say, this a lot, so bear with me if you've heard this before, but we're not a democracy. We're not a nation where the law is supreme, okay? And that is not Jim Crow laws, but laws that were written by, in service of a government of, by, and for the people. That's not what we are. So, like I've said several times before, it's this Orwellian upside down perversion of words, quite frankly, and how we put words together. And as quite frankly have been revealed the last couple of days, is that we actually have a censorship industrial complex that can do this all vis-a-vis algorithms. They can twist and distort information and make sure that certain things can't go viral, and they can control everything. And this is all in service to what I call, because we're no longer a democracy, we're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that literally uses socialism. Remember I said Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to shower tens of trillions of dollars on criminals. And the law never did its job, which is why I had to do what I did, which is the con and all of the other things I just mentioned to you. And it's literally fueled by socialism that fuels this, what I call a mafiacracy, because that's what it is. It's a mob state. It's organized crime. And they are now fueling fascism, which I believe is the MAGA apparatus, because they want to have an identity war. They want to have the culture wars. This goes back to the 70s. This is everything post-civil rights. And they want to make sure we're at each other's throats, even though, trust me, I'm never going to get along with somebody who is a person that's going to lean, and say they're right to life while they support no regulation on military weapons grades, so deranged people can go into schools and murder innocent children. I mean, that's terrorism. And beyond that, those people are involved with, like I learned recently, initiatives and legislative initiatives like Kill the Gays is what it's called. Kill the Gays. So these people are talking out of both sides of their mouth. The right to life, to control, and then kill everybody else, which is fascism. And what I say is corruption births fascism. And the only way you're going to defeat it is if you know the truth, because in a government of, by, and for the people, where the law is supposed to be supreme, and we have institutions such as the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Security and Exchange Commission, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and others on down, including attorneys general all over the United States. When you've got the law and you've got a criminal syndicate in front of your face, and you have the will to be able to prosecute these crimes in an extraordinary way, like we lay out in our work, The Con, then you reveal the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world. And that's what the government of, by, and for the people should have done after 2008, but we didn't. Look, I am trying to reach you one on one. I had an apparatus and a relationship with a guy who came from one of the wealthiest families in the United States. He was incredibly courageous to be able to provide me the opportunity and my partner to be able to research, to go out and find all of the information that led us to understand all of these truths and put them together in our work that ultimately got censored by the Borg. I promise you, we got censored by the Borg. And, he really went out on a limb, if you will, uh, because this was all a spec scenario, and gave millions of dollars to allow us to achieve what I still think is something that should be seen by tens of millions of people. And our relationship is over. It has been for a couple of years, mostly because of the pressure of the scenario, because it wasn't going anywhere and we couldn't penetrate the Borg. But it's like, I couldn't blame him. He's a guy that was like, look, man, this is going nowhere. I can assure you that members of his family have been involved with investing in other things that didn't really go anywhere to begin with, that went global later. And I might have argued to him, look, man, just stick it out, and we'll get there if we play the game the way we need to play the game. But he had gone as far as he wanted to, and that was long enough for me. But at the same time, he walked away, and I could have walked away too. But I've got all of this information plus hundreds of hours on the shelf that reveals even the most extraordinary deception and betrayal in our own judiciary system that has destroyed millions of innocent people. And I mean that literally. I mean, do I know the difference that if you take out a loan that you're supposed to pay that loan based on the terms you agree to? Yeah, but that's where I laid this out on Twitter earlier today. Deceptive acts and practices come from. As a broker or somebody who's putting a deal together, you can't lie and change terms and everything else, and it's a legitimate contract. First and foremost, it's not. But second of all, when you start to understand and you parse out what exactly happened with the securitization of home loans and where they went and the derivatives and everything else, it gets a little complex, but see if you can follow along. You got House A that can generate X amount of revenue, and then suddenly, as it gets put into a tranche filled with tens of thousands of others of revenue streams, downstream with what we call collateralized debt obligations and other derivatives, that single revenue stream wound up creating, in some cases, multiple revenue streams based on one asset. So the question you might ask is, well, how is that possible? Because that would be an impossibility. You can't, it would just be made up on paper. It would just be made up in some sort of data link that nobody could actually look into and really understand what is being pawned off that people are actually investing in these derivatives trades. Well, exactly. That's the whole point. Again, what about deceptive acts and practices and illegal reps and warranties sounds legal to you? They weren't. To the tune of multiple tens of millions of these transactions, maybe hundreds of millions, probably billions, quite frankly. I know that we got to 2006, 2008 in that time period that I think it was a $4 trillion real estate market somehow was feeding a $600 to $800 trillion derivative market. How does that happen? Because of what I just told you. It's a shell game, but it's not just a 3-card Monte. It's like a 26-sided dice loaded with algorithms every which way to Sunday, where the middlemen were lying, stealing, and deceiving every which way to Sunday and blew up the world. And instead of making them go to jail and clawing back all of their gains from that time period, particularly for the CEOs, what we did is we gave them trillions of dollars more. And what's going to happen if you're going to give trillions of dollars to criminals? Are they going to stop? That's what's going on right now in these bank runs. Okay, and then the debt ceiling is part of the same conversation. It's incredible. We could talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy and a lot of those other things, but that's not the point of this dialogue at the moment. I'm trying to make you understand that millions of us have got to come together with the facts, of which I've just teased you a little bit, which is on display in all of the work I've previously mentioned. That then we can really fulfill our destiny to do what Lincoln charged us with and Jefferson charged us with, which was ultimately after the Gettysburg Battle, the Gettysburg Address announced that a government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. That's what I'm telling you. We have to fight for it in every which way to Sunday to do it. And I believe this can be a peaceful process, honestly. And the way I'm setting it up is just basically I want to use the free market to get you to understand that right now, billionaires are spending billions to further corrupt the system so that they can grift trillions for themselves and double and triple and quadruple down in ways that just basically make their lives insanely antithetical to everything that we think we are by way of the free market and everything else. It's all this duplicitous pretzel logic lies. And what I want to do is control that situation, end up putting the bad guys, getting the bad guys out of the system, which is the notion to purge corruption. But you have to invest. And it's an investment in saving our country. And what I'm asking for in honor of the 13 original colonies that did the same thing to purge tyranny of King George III, I'm asking you to invest $13 and recruit 13 people. If you do that, that will give us 169 in the war chest dollars, and we will provide you bumper stickers, a T-shirt, and a lawn, sign if we can, and we'll get that to the right time. But the long and the short of it is, we have some fabulous hashtags that really encapsulate what it is that we're attempting to do. I always say my last name is Lovell. If you know anything about Apollo 13 and Jim Lovell, failure is not an option. We're in that same situation, but as a society. I also quantify this as hashtag the righteous grind. Being able to carry the truth and get it above the madness of lies and deception and the diabolical activity of the demons. I mean, this is nothing short than, it's the ultimate battle of good and evil. I'm reminded of, I'll come back. Actually, I'll drop it now. I mean, I'm reminded of one of my favorite songs of all time by the Rolling Stones, "Sympathy for the Devil." And I think this is all played out in all of the sort of culture wars that we're in the midst of. I'm trying to think of how the lyrics go when it's like, I shouted out, "Who killed the Kennedys?" when after all it was you and me. That's what we're in the midst of until we wake up and we freaking take it to the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Bullshit. I know exactly who he is. It's this system. I know exactly how it operates. I know exactly how to out it, and I know exactly how to bulldoze it just like it's bulldozed millions of us. The betrayal is insane. I had a friend of mine the other day, describe it as kind of like a Nazi empire. I mean, there's people in houses that are legitimately supposed to be there because they beat, previous foreclosure attempts because they proved that, the foreclosing parties didn't have standing. But these foreclosing parties come back over and over and over, and they're able to foreclose eventually because they've got sheriffs that are in on it. And they're paying sheriffs to come in with, basically anti-terrorism, weapons to throw families into the streets. And they don't have the right to do it. This is happening all over the country, and it has been while the media has been asleep. It is financial terrorism. The collateral damage is unbelievable. It has destroyed millions of people. It has created unbelievably destruction to the nuclear family and divorces and homelessness and suicides. It's got to end. We've got to defeat this freaking mythology, this make-believe facade of what we call capitalism, but there is no risk reward. This is all guaranteed, which makes it a monopoly, which makes it everything I've said previous to that. And, further, I want to inspire you, rise, roar, revolt. Look, guys, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. These are all hashtags, by the way. I call it, unlike Russell Brand, who says he's, seeking the great awakening by basically playing footsies with fascists and trying to tweak algorithms because he's going to talk about corruption being, Hunter Biden's laptop in context to what I'm telling you and ignoring this. Okay, whatever the details on Hunter Biden's laptop, I can assure you it's not tens of millions of people being set up, having their lives stolen, getting ground down in the courts illegally, and giving trillions of dollars to the guys that did it. So I call this the Great Reckoning. And always I'm going to end because I'm positive with onwards and upwards. And it's all in purpose of the clean new deal. Look, I am not a communist. I am not a socialist, although I have a great amount of respect for a lot of socialists, especially academics and economists and others that tend to skew democratic socialism. I believe that there's got to be a hybrid state where you have a safety net in the ways that make sense. Again, let me remind you, what I'm revealing to you is over the course of the last 13 years, we have spent $70 trillion plus on a criminal syndicate that is this big, this big. Those are the guys that benefit from it, from everything that should have been happening with the United States if we didn't have a corrupt system. $70 trillion to infrastructure and everything else that we have on our plate and the challenges we have. Do you think we'd be a lot closer to, a paradigm change and a reset and a country of, by, and for the people with this dynamic sort of unbelievable commitment to the American dream in which everybody has a shot? And if you don't have a shot, then we don't grind you down through deception and criminality. What we do is we have a safety net so that people can rebound, man. If you've got a dynamic economy where there's a lot of fairness and you hold the criminals to account, that's called the integrity of law. And that's ultimately everything to me. You can't get to the moon, and NASA demonstrated this, and it happens in every piece of technology we've ever seen. A system cannot function without integrity. So I'll repeat the call to action. If you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, in integrity and liberty, and ultimately sustainability, we have to merge by the millions of us to purge tyranny. And that could be our destiny. I'm telling you, I've got the answers that nobody else will bring to you. I've got the answers that nobody else can find. They're legit, they're real, they're not hyperbole, they're facts, they're evidence, they're things that can be used to turn the table on the corruption. If only I can break through the algorithms, if only I can break through your conscience, if only I can break through your good sense to have you hopefully believe that I'm a guy that you can trust, that I'm a guy that you can walk into the battle of the valley of death with, okay? And I'm not saying that I want to create a bloody, violent revolution. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we still have a chance, because if you invest $13 and you bring 13 people and we get 1,300 people, we're going to create a podcast first, and then we're going to create downstream if we can get more and more and more people. And suddenly everybody else starts to come to us, because you know how this goes. Once you start making, the right kind of attention, then everybody's going to start circling around us. And so then I'll be able to basically recalibrate where Russell has gone wrong. And quite frankly, guys like Jimmy Dore, who I like, but at the same time, anybody who's going to bootleg Tucker Carlson can't see the forest for the trees. I'm sorry. Same with, Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald. This whole system of everybody fighting for, the mic and the algorithms and everything else has twisted everybody's consciousness, man. And nobody understands what the problem is, and nobody can see the tumor for what it is. The truth is the chemo for tumor. And that's what I've got going on my face. We don't have a lot of time left. We don't have any time left. And I've been inspired by everybody that's been on board. But please, for those of you who believe in liberty and justice for all, who want a fair system, who want to end the suffering and the misery, and who want to defeat the lies, you have to join us. Please don't hesitate. Onwards and upwards. Oh, and the last thing I will say, what I didn't say before, is that, yeah, I don't have any support from a billionaire, and I don't want it. I don't want any billionaires tweaking what it is that I'm trying to do in the marketplace of ideas, because they've got ideas of, clicks we could buy and other things. No, I don't want that. We need a grassroots revolution equipped with the truth that we've been able to get. Please join us.